Okay, Bernard, so we get into a third category. We spoke about the person of God, three of them there, foundations. Then we spoke about the purpose of God, three foundations. And now we're getting on to the patterns of God. And you've also got three foundations that you've slotted in there. Just talk to us about those.
Well, obviously, going back to God Himself, I felt He would lead me to that, and God is going to put patterns in place which lead to His purposes and from His person.
Okay.
You know, so it's rooted in that. And the first one is oneness, because I, the Lord your God, am one God. One of the big mistakes I think we have made amongst believers is assuming He's referring to the number one. You know, that it's just one person. He's Father, Son, Holy Spirit. When He represents Himself, He represents Himself as a marriage. That's what He created to show what He was like. So it wasn't the number one, it was more the oneness that He was looking for. Same in John 17, when Jesus prayed, it was a oneness there. So that's being like God. And so all the patterns are actually coming out of what God is like, how He designed the world in creation, and how, in a sense, He restored the world, or the process of restoring the world in redemption, which basically, the three patterns are based on the oneness of God and the visibility of that we can see like in a marriage, the reproductiveness of God and His nature, which we can see in a family, it's like a family and it's reproductive, and the ruling nature of God, which we can see in the way He works to extend His kingdom. Those are going to be the three foundations of the pattern. It's not prescriptive. This is the DNA principle. This is what God is like. This is what His work is like. This is the way He works to bring about His purpose, and that's what we'll be looking at. Yeah, I've been talking about how everything emanates from who God is. So we've been looking at the pattern of God is not just a methodology. It stems from who He is, and it's how He governs, and of course it's connected to His purposes, because He wants to achieve His purposes. So it makes sense then that oneness would be a government to produce a bride, where there's supposed to be a marriage between us and Him, of oneness. That family and reproduction would be how you produce children, and the kingdom work is how you prepare a place where He rules. So of course the Holy Spirit can come and dwell. And so with that as a backdrop, we come to, if you like, foundation number 7, which is the first one of these pattern ones, which is the foundation of oneness. We've already said a bit about this, but let's get right to the nub of it, which basically means the universe is run by a oneness community. The whole universe is run by a oneness community, and so it is absolutely critical that we learn to reproduce that oneness. God, reproducing after His own kind, made a husband and a wife, so they would learn oneness. And I believe there are many reasons for this. One, there is a distinction between God, who is a community, and Satan, who is an individual. And that division becomes important because for love to be the defining, governing factor, then you have to have somebody to love. And so God as a community is able to exist in a place of love, from which His authority, His power, His rule comes out. Whereas as an individual, it doesn't matter, and I'm not saying Satan's loving for a minute, but in the end you're going to end up with a chain of command. And this is not only a problem as a foundation, but we've seen it a problem practically, is that it will always therefore be about power in the end, rather than about love. Whereas God is love. And I guess an illustration of that would be, even at its very best, even individualism under the rule of God. So we take King David, who is a man after God's own heart. In the end, was something that God didn't want; He just allowed. God has always wanted His government, His pattern, His rule to come out of community, reflect His community, out of a oneness that reflects His oneness. Firstly, because of the thing I've already mentioned, because then it means it's a government of love. Secondly, because, and that's the government thing, it takes two to agree. Where two or three are agreed, they are in the midst of them. It's about authority. There is an authority in agreement, a spiritual authority, where we dwell together in unity. God commands the blessing, because it actually calls down God's authority where there is unity. And you cannot have that level of authority with just one. Another point would be that actually it's reproductive. That actually you need two people to reproduce. He made them male and female, and it's actually the coming together of those two in oneness that produces reproduction, which reproduces the life of God. So for all these reasons, it's why God builds that way. And why probably, I mean, we've talked about lots of foundations, but I feel this will be an absolutely key one in our age, because we have sown a rampant individualism that has infected the church in every way. And so people talk the language of team, they talk the language of doing this together, but in the end, the very thing that Jesus warned against, we're always wanting to know who in the end is going to lord it, who is going to be in charge, rather than how we're going to find oneness. You see, because in God, even in the Father, of course there's headship, there's leadership. We're not saying there's no leadership, but the purpose of that leadership is to serve the process of oneness. So you come together. The husband's leadership should serve the oneness of the marriage. So we're not doing away with leadership. We're actually, that oneness brings genuine authority that builds everybody up, rather than pulls them down. And a good way of saying this, which is definitely, you'll hear me repeat many times over, that God's authority out of oneness comes, that authority comes from submission rather than for submission. So I think we tend to think of authority as how we get people to submit. So the oneness represents God, oneness has authority, oneness is where love comes from, oneness is reproductive, and it's why, I don't want to make too much of this subject, but why when God sent out the apostles it was always 2 by 2, or they went in larger teams, because as one they cannot represent him, as one they do not have the same authority, and as one they cannot reproduce. So oneness is core to the way God moves and the way he builds.